This presentation of the Savage Nation is brought to you by Inheritance Funding Company.
On the air, online, and on the go. This is Talk 910 KNEW.
Warning. The Michael Savage Show contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised.
Now, America's most exciting radio talk show, The Savage Nation. Here is Michael Savage.
Some of the topics that we were discussing today on the Savage Nation. Representative Peter King spoke the truth. You heard what he said, didn't you? Endless Michael Jackson coverage everywhere. I call him the king of pill popping. And pretty soon they're going to have his funeral, and I don't know if I'll be able to take it anymore. But over the weekend, Representative Peter King in New York finally stood up and told the truth. He called Michael Jackson a pervert.
For the last, I don't know how long now, this lowlight, Michael Jackson, his name, his face, his picture, is all over the newspapers, television, radio.
Somebody, aside from those who know what's going on, called the media out on this insanity. And that's the reason why the media is celebrating Michael Jackson. Not in spite of the fact that he was a perv, but because of it. Perversion is all the media celebrates. Real Americans are ignored. Tea parties ignored. Patriots ignored. Soldiers ignored. All ignored on the 4th of July. Instead, the birthday of our nation has become a celebration of the 7 deadly sins. Al Frankenstein goes to Washington. The comedian Al Frankenstein showed up in Washington getting ready to be sworn in as a senator. Already he's in lockstep with the rest of the neo-Marxist crowd. He even called Harry Reid Mr. Leader. Obama overseas. Here's Obama on another overseas trip. This week in Russia, visiting with Medvedev and Putin, giving up 1/3 of America's nuclear arsenal. This is the latest in a long list of foreign countries that Obama has been to since he was elected only a few months ago. He's been to Turkey, Egypt, the Czech Republic, Mexico, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, France, Canada, England, and Germany. And that doesn't include the trips he made during the presidential campaign. You've heard me say it before in this program. Obama doesn't want to be president of the United States. He dreams of being president of the world. After all, he solved all of our problems, hasn't he? And not only does he want to be president of the world, he wants to be salesman of the world. At the same time that Russia is building up its military against us, Obama's visit has been the occasion to announce $1.5 billion worth of trade deals with Russia. Boeing and PepsiCo are both going to make huge new investments in Russia. Nothing wrong with that. Apparently, from that perspective, that's a good deal. But that's not the problem with Obama. His perspective is global, not local. Remember all those liberal bumper stickers that say, think globally, act locally? Well, Obama is thinking and acting globally, just as George Bush before him. Nothing wrong with that necessarily, but he hasn't solved all of America's problems first, has he? Why not put in some Buy American clauses? Well, that's anathema to him. Why make trade deals with unfriendly foreign powers than stopping American job bleeding? Well, I guess he does this because he believes that he is the president of the world. After all, he spent as much time in Indonesia as he did in the United States. So Afghanistan is more important to him than Arkansas. New Delhi is more important to him than New York Delhi. And Saudi Arabia is more important to him than South Dakota. Now, over July 4th weekend, I read a biography of a real American, a wonderful book, LeMay, The Life and Wars of General Curtis LeMay, Warren Kozak. Here's a man who started out in a very poor farm in Ohio, had to take control of help his family out when he was 8 years old. He had no connections in the military, unlike the military of today, where you get ahead if you know somebody. The man began with nothing. He rose from obscurity. He had no social graces. He had no old boy connections, never went to West Point, bad lineage, and he became America's most innovative and controversial military commander. Curtis LeMay was a national hero. He was celebrated in victory parades and on the cover of Time magazine in 1945. But 20 years later, after the radical left scum took over the media, Hollywood and the vermin in the press vilified him. In fact, the low-life Salenter at I.F. Stone, the hero of Obama and the leftists, called him the caveman in a jet bomber. And yet he was the man who understood what war was. He was the man who started by flying bi-winged open cockpit planes in the 20s, and he wound up commanding America's post-war fleet of giant B-52 bombers, and he ended his career in an age of intercontinental nuclear missiles. I want to tell you something else I read about him. Here was a man who, unlike the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or the admirals or the generals of today, led his men into combat by flying point in every bombing mission. He insisted on flying the lead airplane into flak. The men followed him. You understand what I'm saying to you? Do you know, look what happened to America now. We have PR men running everything, and that's why we are not winning anything. We have nothing but fakers in usher uniforms. But LeMay was the man. LeMay was the man who helped turn the bombing effort over Europe from an ineffective and costly failure into a success. LeMay was the architect behind the firebombing of Tokyo and 64 other Japanese cities. And so if you add blunt honesty to a brutal sense of realism and a strong devotion to the nation, what you have is Curtis LeMay. I'll read you more from this on the Savage Nation when I come back. The life and wars of General Curtis LeMay, for one reason. It's because he was the most roundly criticized by the radical leftist vermin who criticize every American patriot today and instead extol the lowest of the low like Michael Jackson and Senator Al Frankenstein. I'll be right back.
Is your inheritance stuck in probate? Inheritance Funding Company can advance you the cash you need in as little as 72 hours. Go to inheritancefunding.com or call 877-YOU-AIR. That's 877-YOU-HEIR.
The Wall Street Journal this morning, weekdays 5 to 6 a.m. on Talk 910 KNEW.
Kozak, author of LeMay, The Life and Wars of Curtis LeMay, is joining us to talk about an American general who ordered the wartime death of more civilians than anyone in American history. More than Sherman, more than blood and guts General Patton, he was an American hero during World War II. His face was on the cover of Time magazine, and he was recognized as being the general who prevented the need for an Allied invasion of the Japanese homeland, saving 1 million American lives. His name, Curtis LeMay, the Air Force commander who oversaw the fleets of B-17s during the European theater during World War II. And after the inevitable collapse of the Nazi regime, he was transferred to Asia to replace an ineffective commander of America's B-29 superfortresses in their battle with the Japanese. His firebombing of Tokyo caused the death of 100,000 civilians in a single day and left millions homeless. According to an American report, more persons lost their lives by fire in Tokyo in a 6-hour period than any equivalent period of time in the history of man. Warren, did Curtis LeMay save lives by his terrible destruction of not only Tokyo, but of dozens upon dozens of other Japanese cities? Why did he change his opinion when he went from Europe to Japan to go from precision bombing of German cities to widespread firebombing of Japanese cities?
Well, Michael, to answer the first question, there is no doubt that lives were saved. It's a strange calculus of war that, or we can even say it's a tremendous irony. As you said, LeMay killed more civilians than any other man in U.S. history. There's no doubt about that. But by doing that in Japan, he forced the emperor and the Japanese to surrender before a land invasion. And there is absolutely no doubt that the U.S. was planning the most massive amphibious invasion that would have taken place first in the first wave in November of 1945 with a second wave in March of 1946. It would have made D-Day look like a cakewalk, and there were estimates of 1 million American casualties. I think that's actually low, and there probably would have been at least 2 million Japanese deaths because the Japanese were preparing for this as well. Just as the United States was, so were the Japanese. And the civilian population. We're talking about old men, women, and children were being taught how to kill. They were basically going to be the suicide bombers of today, only there were going to be many, many more of them.